So I'd like to introduce Venerable Matthieu Ricard now. He is a Tibetan Buddhist monk and has spent many years in retreat under the guidance of some of the greatest Tibetan masters of the last century, including Kangyur Rinpoche and Dilga Khyentse Rinpoche. He's been the French translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama since 1989. He's received the French Légion d'honneur for his humanitarian work in his charity Karuna, which is involved in over 200 humanitarian projects in the Himalayan area. And half the proceeds of this talk that you've kindly donated will be going to that charity. He's spoken at various international forums, including the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. He's published on many different subjects, including Buddhist masters, people of Tibet and Bhutan. His photography has gained accolades from Henri Cartier-Bresson. His book, The Philosopher and the Monk, was a bestseller and detailed his dialogue with his father, the French philosopher. And he's also published on animal rights and veganism, and his book on altruism is also the subject of tonight's talk. This, notwithstanding all these many accolades, the reason actually we're able to invite him as a secular mindfulness organization is that he's also formed a bridge between the Buddhist world and the sort of secular scientific world. Notably in his book, The Quantum and the Lotus. He has a PhD in molecular genetics, and he's been involved in studies led by people like Richie Davison and Tanya Singer into the neuroscience of meditation practice, where they've been able to demonstrate striking changes in the brain as a result of long-term meditation. And we use your work quite a bit in our work. So when we teach Mindful Self-Compassion program, those of us who do that, we spend some time referencing your very useful distinction between empathy and compassion. So I think that's enough from me. There's a lot more I could say, but I'd like to hand over now to you, Matthieu. Thank you so much. It's really an honor that you are joining us. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, good evening to everyone. And thank you, Robert, for your kind introduction. So I would like to share with you a few thoughts about the notion of altruism, compassion, perhaps say a few words about the distinction between altruism, empathy, compassion, and the various aspects of those. But we can sort of bring that by looking either on the personal side of compassion or on the as a general concept to address the challenges of our times. So maybe I will first start with the personal one. So yes, so we can approach others in many different ways. We can be extremely self-centered. We can be open to others. So what does it do when we are very self-centered? Usually it begins with a strong identification with the notion of me, I, some ego. And then when we verify that, and then there is me and the world, me and others, and we create a big gap, almost unbridgeable gap between self and others. So that's usually because we sort of feel naturally that, you know, I was this little boy I see in some photographs, and I grew up, and then I became this old monk. But I have this sort of feeling that somehow it's me all the way along that traveled that, like a little boat traveling on the river. And so if there was such an entity, like Descartes said, that is singular, autonomous, and somehow stable, permanent, then naturally that will be the heart quintessence of our being. And then we hope to protect it, we hope to please it. And then from that comes attraction, repulsion, and that unfolds into animosity or craving, sometimes lack of discernment, because craving and animosity distort reality. We don't see things as they are. We see things either because of our strong grasping to something or because of our strong aversion to something. So we superimpose characteristics that do not belong to that thing. And then many other sort of mental toxins step up, like envy, jealousy, pride, and greediness, and so forth. But that results also inevitably in suffering. So that idea of whether we do have or not a kind of independent, autonomous, lasting self is not just a philosophical matter like to be discussed, like the Christian soul, the Atman of the Hindus, or the refutation of that by the Buddhism. It has repercussion in our life. So yes, Buddhism philosophy has been deconstructing that, saying that it's fine to think me when we wake up in the morning, I'm here, I suffer, I'm hungry or I'm happy. And then there is the person, which is the stream of our, constantly changing dynamic flow of experience. And that's define a person, just like, as well as the stream of the Ganges or the Thames or the Seine River is something that is different. Nevertheless, there is no little head popping up out of the Ganges and saying, I am the Ganges, please don't forget that. So as long as we see the self as a dynamic stream ever changing, it's okay to give it a name. It's a convenient illusion, provided we don't verify that. So because it has consequences, we need to deconstruct that. So sometimes we say, oh, you pushed me, that means me is the body. Or you hurt my feelings, then now the me is the feeling. But we say my feelings, so that means you are the owner of the body and the feeling. So you see, it always evades proper investigation. You can't find it in the past thoughts which are gone, future thought not yet there, even you can fantasize and imagine them, and the present being ungraspable. So in the end, it is a convenient illusion. There's nothing wrong with that, but we should not verify that. So, because otherwise, if we're so excessively self-centered, the sense of exacerbated self-importance, basically, we make our life miserable and we make everyone's life miserable. So it's a lose-lose situation. Now, if you take the opposite direction, seeing we're all interdependent, of course, my happiness matters, but so does that of others. Though the most common denominator of all sentient beings is no one wants to wake up in the morning thinking, may I suffer my whole life, my whole day, and if possible, my whole life. So if we just realize that deep within ourselves, so then we start to wish to do things that are beneficial for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. We call that self-compassion. It's very good, especially for people who have some kind of aggressivity against themselves. And then we are concerned about achieving that. So then we don't do anything randomly. There are things that needs to be done and avoided if you want to avoid suffering. And then we can also transport ourselves in someone else's mind and say, well, even they are confused like I am, still they don't want to suffer. So I should be concerned by that. And therefore, there's things I should do to them or not do to them in terms of causing suffering or happiness. So the whole thing starts to make sense, and the interdependence of that can happen. So that's kind of the foundation of altruism. And I know it has been studied a lot, compassion and love in the sense of positive resonance with others. I'm not speaking of romantic love, but the sense of a very warm, positive resonance with others. Someone like Barbara Fredrickson, who is one of the founders of positive psychology, said this is the supreme emotion because it comes with a whole host of other positive emotion, more than any other one. So in a way, it is the most positive mental state we can think of. And when we started to do neuroscience study with Richard Davidson and Antoine Lutz, and then later Paul Ekman and Tanya Singer and many others, it turned out that the voluntarily generated mental state that brings the most striking difference in the brain as a self-induced state of mind, and that was measured in the gamma frequency of the brain, which was compassion, unconditional compassion. That was the most powerful actor of change to get a difference of brain change from a resting state to an active state. And it was far more than ever measured in neuroscience. That's why it became quite exciting, and it started the field of contemplative neuroscience, and that gave rise to a paper in the PNAS that was the most downloaded one of the most downloaded that year. So, because in a way, that brings not only it is directed to others, towards others, but it also, as a bonus, you're not looking for that, but it does also, is the best way to feel a sense of deep fulfillment. What the Greeks used to call eudaimonia, a sense of accomplishment, fulfillment, meaningfulness, not just a pleasant sensation, but something much deeper than that. So it's a win-win situation. So that's for the personal sort of experience, self-experience. Now, if you look at the bigger picture, if we see what are the main sort of challenges of the 21st century, there's one of them is to reconcile 3 time scale. The short term, the midterm, and the long term. The short term will be like a like a mother that needs in Africa that needs to feed their kids for the next year or the next week, or something that is really urgently needed to relieve suffering, or in terms of conflict or wars or something. And then there's the midterm. That midterm, basically every sentient being wants to have a natural aspiration to flourish in life. No one wants to suffer the whole life. So we have to provide the conditions for that, fulfill their deepest wishes in life. Then there's a new challenge, because like 12,000 years ago, we entered the Holocene. That was a very sort of stable time of climate, one of the most stable we had ever known for the last 200,000 years or so. And that allowed human civilization to flourish. So, but at that time, 12,000 years ago, we were 1 to 5 million people, human on Earth, so no big deal. So now we were 1 billion in 1900 and now 8 billion. And of course, the impact it had on the planet and other species. There's any species, no predators predate on certain species, not all of them. There's no other species which has just a vast effect on the whole of the biosphere, to the extent that we may cause the 6th extinction, the last one being the one of the dinosaur when the big asteroids has hit the Earth. So nobody has planned that. Nobody woke up thinking, I'm going to wreck the planet. Nevertheless, future generation will say, well, you knew, but you did nothing. So therefore, if you put around a table, environmental scientists, social workers, politicians, investors, people from all walks of life, teachers and so forth, and you need a concept, a sort of Aryan thread that can make them work together for a better world, then, selfishness will not do the job. Because if selfishness, you will maximize your personal preference in the immediate, that's the definition of the Homo economicus. And then, you only think of this generation. I heard an American billionaire saying that about the rays of the ocean. He said he found absurd to change his behavior now for something that will happen in 100 years. So maybe he has no children or grandchildren. So now there's one concept is having more consideration for others. If you have more consideration for others, you will take care of poverty in the midst of plenty, something that the Homo economicus cannot do because that doesn't maximize immediately your personal preferences. And you will take care of common goods, the quality of the air, of the water, of the atmosphere, of democracy, the investments of knowledge and science and so forth. You have to step out of maximizing your personal immediate interest. So we have economy at the service of society and not society at the service of economy. Now, in the midterm, you'll provide a proper environment for people to flourish in life. That's policies that are about it at the workplace, in transportation, education, healthcare, everything that affects the quality of life. And if you have more consideration for others, you're not going to sacrifice future generation because of this kind of crazy rush towards it's a crisis of the superfluous. If you think that average American citizen emit 200 times more CO2 than the Zambian, and the Qatari 2,000 more times than the Afghanese person. So that's completely disproportionate. As usual, it is the poorest who suffer. There's also a environmental injustice. They're the one who will suffer first of increase of contagious disease, of the waste of water, of all those. Already now, there's many thousands of people dying because of climate change, and it's going to be, of course, much worse. So if the temperature goes to 4 degrees, then it's about 10% likelihood. So nobody will take a plane if you have 1 chance out of 10 to fall down from the sky. But we do have this possibility. Probably the human population might come down to 1 billion, but it's not because of birth control. It's because of immense suffering, famines, wars, and so forth. And we're already seeing that coming. So in that sense, having more consideration for others is not just like a goofy, idealistic, utopian idea. It's the most pragmatic way to address the challenges of the century. So you might say, well, Hannah Arendt spoke of the banality of evil, and Freud said, I didn't ask much myself about human nature, but from what I know, most of them are rascals. So if you think that the fundamental human nature is vitiated, then it's like trying to wash a piece of charcoal for 100 years. It's not going to become like gold. But if we believe, and that's also the Buddhist perspective, but there are many others like Rousseau and others who taught that we have basically a good potential, and we need to preserve that and make it flourish. And the studies with very young children, such as those done by Tomasello and Warneken and many others, have shown, to contrary to what Piaget and Freud were thinking, the children are not little selfish brutes that start to become civilized around 5 years old to function in society. It's rather the opposite. They are unconditionally cooperators, and they prefer much better people who behave nicely toward each other. So as a social animal, although we can become psychopaths, commit mass murder, and so forth, we have a stronger predisposition toward appreciating kindness, also kindness between people that we witness, cooperation. And so, in fact, I more argue about the banality of goodness, which is also that most of the time, most of 8 billion human beings behave decently with each other, but we don't see that because that's the default mode, and we consider it's normal. So if we come out of a train, you don't say, well, that's great, nobody kill each other or fight each other. And if they do, we will speak of that about for months on. So we don't see that basically our baseline is to behave normally with each other, and most of the time also to be ready to help. We can think that in major catastrophes, like in Katrina, storm, where actually the governor sent the army, but actually people were helping each other in incredible ways. And that always happens in natural catastrophe, that there's a huge surge of cooperation and solidarity and so forth. So now to maybe the subject that we all concerned about, can we develop such qualities of altruism, compassion, and so forth? Well, all the human capacity we have, many of them are, of course, innate, but we are not born learning how to read and write, to solve mathematical equations, play tennis, and sing, and so forth. We learn that. We go to education, of course, and we don't, maybe sometimes we're not so happy about having to do so many years and professional training, but we do so because we see the benefit at the end of the tunnel. So there's a virtue in training in various capacities. So it will be a mystery if basic human qualities like altruism, compassion, resilience, inner strength, inner peace, emotional balance, and name it, will be at the top right from the beginning, or unchangeable, like written in stone. That will be a complete exception to every other quality we have. Why would they be? So the thing is, we may not all become Olympic champion of compassion or anything else, but we certainly have a huge margin between our baseline and a more optimal way of being in those ways. So that is what, contemplative science or Buddhism has explored for the last 2,500 years. That's what the collaboration with neuroscience and psychologists have brought about and shown quite convincingly that, yes, we can change, the brain can change functionally when you engage in a particular type of meditation. And if you repeat that quite often, say at least 20 minutes a day, after 1 or 2 months, you can start seeing structural changes. And if you do that for 50,000 hours for some subject who went to the lab, then the change is actually proportional to the duration. That means it's quite encouraging. That is not you get all at the beginning and nothing after that, or you have to wait 20 years and suddenly, boom, it goes up. It's actually related to the amount of time and effort and dedication that you put in it. And it gets more stable as well if you do it regularly and for over a long time. So basically, in Buddhist teaching, we said meditation is best done when there's many repeated, regular, short meditation is better than one big one from time to time. It's like you water your flower in your flat. You flower every day, you put water every day, little bit, not a big bucket every month, because in the meantime, the plant has died. So yes, we can change that. Myself, I went to, collaborated with that. I spent more than 100 hours in the fMRI machine. They burnt me, they electrocuted me, they did transmagnetic stimulation, they put me radioactive stuff. I thought, well, I'm old, so let's go for it. And so it was a very nice time, with almost like a sangha among scientists. No, I'm a bit retired for all that. But I think it was very productive and stimulating. And so in the course of that, some of the scientists asked me once, I remember Stephen Koslin, he was the chair of the psychology department in Harvard. And he said, what do you get out of for yourself, for you meditators? What do you get after your, relation with scientists? I told him, well, I'm not very sure. When I'm in my hermitage, basically I do the same thing, but I'm more quiet. There's no noise of the MRI or people poking my brain or giving me electric shock on the wrist or things like that. So it's a little bit more easier to meditate in my hermitage. But besides that, well, we are happy to know that we're not just, daydreaming, and there's some actually measurable difference in the immune system, many kinds of other ways that we did measure, like, increasing the telomerase that slow down the aging. Remember, there's so many studies now, quite interesting, even at the cellular level. Epigenetic changes, in 8 hours of meditation, there's a change of expression of genes related to stress. So all this is fascinating. And I'm so happy to know about that, but it doesn't change my practice in my hermitage. That was until I started working with Tanya Singer, because before that, the great psychologist Paul Ekman had asked me, when you meditate on compassion, do you need to suffer about the suffering of the other? And when I thought about my great teachers, they have boundless compassion, but they didn't seem to be, in anguish or overly tormented or burning out, because they constantly, generate compassion for all sentient beings. The Dalai Lama does say that every morning. He told us once, when he gets up at 3 in the morning until 6 or 7, he does practice. Once at least every morning, he said, when he thinks of suffering of being, he cries. But at the same time, compassion takes over, and very warm compassion turns towards others. So he said, but deep within, I do not sort of feel anxious or worried. So, so I was a bit puzzled when Paul Ekman asked me that. Then I went to Tanya Singer's lab, and she was one of the world specialists on empathy. So I didn't know much about empathy yet. I studied it later when I And when I interacted with Tanya, with Paul Gilbert and Christine Neff and others, self-compassion, empathy, but I was not so clear. So she's one of the specialists of empathy, and she saw that so when you come with someone who is full of joy, you become joyful, and it's not emotional contagion. You know it's because of the other person. And then if someone suffers, and that's where we come to the, people who in the care, people who care for in the medical world, people who care of homeless, of migrant, of some family member. So they are again and again and again exposed to suffering. So now, the thing is, if you resonate with that, Tanya had shown that you really suffer. The areas in the brain that are activated are the same as the area when you suffer. So you suffer because of the suffering of others. And actually, empathy, this is affective empathy. There's also cognitive empathy, which is the theory of mind to guess or to know what people are thinking, but that's quite different. Now, the affective empathy, it is the effect that the state of others has on you. So the more, of course, if you resonate with suffering, it becomes like the burden can get increased. At some point, it's unbearable. There's an emotional exhaustion, what we call empathic distress. And the great psychologist Daniel Batson has recognized 7 kinds of empathy. And empathic distress doesn't lead to altruism. There's only one, which is empathic concern. So empathic distress actually handicaps you. You cannot take care anymore. You burn out. And also there was study showing that if someone is burned out, the patients feel less well treated by that person, even they don't know that the caregiver is in burnout. So that's something that people sometimes don't have. Psychopaths notoriously don't feel that, so they can cut people in pieces and they think it's great. But they have a very good cognitive empathy because they're very calculating, they're very skillful in knowing what people are thinking to manipulate them and to abuse them. So it is quite a different process. So when I went to Tanya's lab and she put me in the fMRI and then she said, do what you do usually. So I meditated on the way I do on compassion. And, it was interactive. And also she was using something, technique was quite special, that is real-time fMRI. Instead of waiting for a few weeks for the result, within seconds, you know which area of the brain are activated. So she said, what are you doing? This is not what we usually see for empathy. She says, come out, we need to talk. So I came out and I explained her. And she said, but can you try just empathy, resonating with the suffering of others? I said, I was meditating on compassion. So I said, okay. And I'd seen the night before at the lab, we were in Maastricht at that time, about a BBC feature on a Romanian orphan that was incredibly miserable and it was so much suffering. So I just thought of that for resonating for half an hour, used to 1 minute neutral state, 1 minute empathic distress, empathic resonance with suffering. And within 45 minutes, I had a complete burnout. It was unbearable. I felt powerless. The suffering was so unbearable, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to touch them in my mind because they're so fragile. So at the end, Sanya said, well, would you like to shift to compassion, or shall we take a break? Because normally you don't leave people in fMRI for 3 hours. So I said, please, let me continue with compassion because, it will be important and good to do so. So when I shifted to compassion, this was like breaking a dam, like every atom of suffering is filled with atom of love. And later we defined that compassion is other-oriented, while empathy is self-oriented. It's the effect it has on you, and compassion is entirely turned to others. It's the loving wish that may being be free from suffering or the cause of suffering. So it's like the doctor on the battlefield. He's not going to cry each time he sees someone wounded. He's going to do, tirelessly take care of that person. So there's an element of courage in compassion. It replenishes itself. So actually, we did find that actually compassion was like an antidote to empathic distress. And Tanya studied that extensively, and people who are in empathic distress, if you generate compassion, then that empathic distress disappears. So we speak often in the medical world of compassion fatigue, but we show that there's no compassion fatigue. Actually, there's empathy fatigue, and it's compassion that remedies to it. And empathy, stand-alone empathy, is like a water pump. Without water, it burns. No, there have been, some books written against empathy. Frans de Waal wrote a book on the age of empathy, and I think Paul Bloom wrote one on the negative effect. But again, it's not that it's negative at all. We are equipped by evolution with empathy. This is so important, because if we don't know if this person is suffering or not, like psychopaths don't resonate with the suffering of others. That's one of the proof. So we need fundamentally to be able to recognize, is that person joyful, suffering, sad, happy, angry? So that's through this resonance, we know that. But, it's like an alarm bell. Well, this is the situation. But if it is with suffering, and if the alarm bell rings 24 hours a day, that doesn't work. You fall into distress and burnout. There's no way out. So either you stop your work or you distance yourself. That was the classical thing, emotional protection and distance. But then you become cold, and there's many instances of that. You don't want that either. You want to remain very loving and human, but not fall in distress. Imagine a mother who is in the corridor where a child is very sick inside the room in the hospital. Now, if she's so distressed and she paced back and forth in the corridor, she's much better be inside and take the hand of the child and be filled with love, and for the child it will be so much better. So anyway, the idea is that those can be trained. We can train compassion, and Tanya tried, but she had a little trouble in her career, but she had a program called Resource, which has keep on changing. But basically, I went myself to several hospitals to speak about that. And we work with the SAMU Social, which SAMU is the quick intervention force in Paris for people who are very sick, but also SAMU, the social SAMU is about homeless, migrants, people in difficulty. And we do sessions of training, more than 200 people of those social workers, to help them to get more emotional balance, to prevent the burnout. So we work with different associations, and we bring our teachers. And so we have a large program in France about doing that, which is, I think, very important. And I hope that this notion will be recognized, that the need to cultivate compassion. There's a Dr. David Schlim who gave seminars on compassion in the United States, because he said when he was a doctor, mostly they asked him to stay awake for 36 hours, but he rarely heard the word compassion as part of the curriculum. So it's really something crucial to better take care of others. So in a nutshell, when we speak of compassion, of meditation, the Sanskrit word bhavana means cultivating. The Tibetan word gom means familiarizing yourself. So really, it is about cultivating some quality for which we have the potential, but which are dormant, latent, and not fully bloomed. And it has become more familiar, not only with quality like altruism and compassion, or mindfulness, or vigilance, or attentive presence, or pure awareness, whatever, but also becoming familiar with the way our mind works. And behind the screen, at a deeper level, behind the screen of thoughts, what is there? What is that pure consciousness, basic consciousness, which may be fully lucid and aware and yet have no particular content? That is the most fundamental aspect of mind. In terms of collaboration with neuroscience, we try to probe that little bit in Belgium with Stephen Lawrence, and we have got quite interesting result. But this is not usually a subject that is studied in neuroscience because it's very basic. However, even some theoretician of consciousness like Tononi, I remember, asked me, is there a state of mind for meditators where the pure awareness, but no mental construct. I said, of course, that's what somehow is the basis of everything. It's like the space. If you have space, then you can have clouds, mountains, a castle, forest. If the space is made of iron or wood, nothing can happen. So space allowed everything to unfold, manifest. Likewise, the pure aspect of basic luminosity of mind allows everything else. It allows emotion, memory, everything. So now the content is what you put in it. It is to follow the law of cause and effect, and it changes all the time. So it's up to us to see what we put in our mental landscape. But the good news is because there's this pure awareness that is unconditioned, then change is possible. If anger, hatred, craving was so deeply present in the very fabric of our mind, then we could not change. But because the most fundamental aspect is awareness, then it can be changed. It's like a light. If you shine a light on a heap of garbage, it doesn't become dirty. If you shine a light on a heap of gold, it doesn't become expensive. Light allows all that to be perceived, to be seen, to be recognized, but light is not changed by what it lights up. So that's a very important concept. I don't have much time to go on and on, but this is really the key for acknowledging that change is possible and seeing that we are a mixture of light and shadows. Change is desirable. So in a way, the object of change is the mind. The mind can change the mind, and therefore we should not underestimate, as Mingyur Rinpoche said, we should not underestimate the power of transformation of mind. So just as a few considerations. And again, as a conclusion, among all the change that we could bring to become more altruistic, I think is the most powerful, the most potent. And as Victor Hugo said, there's nothing more powerful than an idea for which the time has come. And I think the time of altruism and cooperation has come more than ever. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matthieu. That's such an inspiring and important message that you're giving us, I think. We've had a couple of questions, but it's just a couple, so I think it might be more interesting to hear directly from the people to ask them if that's okay with those people. Otherwise, I can read them out. But Judith, would you like to ask your question, Judith Soulsby?
Thank you. And thank you very much, Matthieu, for a very inspiring talk and very funny too. I'm
really okay. That's
yes,
good.
I kept laughing. What I would love to understand is when you're meditating, developing compassion in a meditation, what do you do with your mind in order to develop that compassion? Do you say words? Do you develop feelings in the heart? It's sort of a bit more about the nuts and bolts of what you do in that meditation.
Well, I think the most simplest way is to, what the idea is, we all have moments of unconditional love for a child, a dog, or a dear one, or sometimes we feel with love for everyone, who knows how long it will last. But so there's this very warm feeling of unconditional love. The unconditional love means we don't exclude anyone from our heart, everyone but not my neighbor and things like that. And actually, some people think it's very impractical. I heard I won't name him, but a US philosopher told me, this is crazy. So this idea of universal love, you have to start with your kids and your dear ones, and how can you love everyone? And I mentioned this is not about getting up in the morning saying, I'm going to make everyone happy today. It's just that at least you have this feeling, may all beings find happiness and the cause of happiness. Even the worst dictators, may the cruelty, the hatred, the greed, the indifference dissipate from that person's mind. And you can wish, of course. And so if you don't exclude anyone, that's universal love. And nobody expects that you are going to make it from one day to the next. So what you do is like, learning how to sail or to climb mountains or anything. You start on the easy way, like a fine day, with a little breeze and with a good instructor, you break the sails and then you try. So then slowly, you can sail, to the Cape Horn in big storms because you got experience. So in that, for compassion and altruism and loving kindness, it's the same. So you should not start with the bloody dictator. This probably you get very angry in a few minutes. So what you do is you think of let come in your mind the person which you wish nothing but good to that person. May that person flourish in life, find happiness, be spared suffering, may all that person's aspiration come true, and so forth. And then you let that thought fill your mental landscape. There's only but love. That can happen. As I said, it happens from time to time, but it doesn't last. Then you get up, you do something else, you think of something else. So maybe lasts 15 seconds. But here, instead of that same feeling, we maintain it 30 seconds, 1 minute, 3 minutes, half an hour, 5 hours if you want. So how do you do that? Well, you watch your mind. And you sort of you put the sort of like a guard at the door of your mind. What happens? Am I distracted? Oh, I'm being distracted. So no worries, no further comment. Just come back to it, like the butterfly coming back to the flower. Or is it decline? No, it's a bit dull. So you revive it. And so you try over 10 minutes, 20 minutes to keep it at this perfectly vivid, at its top intensity. But when the intense, I don't mean like, shaking and frenzy. I mean the quality, like a pure color, a pure light, like the blue sky in the high altitude mountains, And so something very clear, the quality of it is good. If you're distracted, you come back to it. So that's cultivating. Instead of 15 seconds, you do that and again. So it's same for, attentive presence. It's same for altruistic love. It's same for compassion for those who suffer. And then you extend the circle to, not only people who did good to you or dear to you, but to strangers, and then slowly to those obnoxious people. So it's like a doctor who sees a violent, mad person. He will maybe control that person for a while, and then he's going to see, can I cure that person instead of bashing their brain? So that's the same attitudes gradually you can develop. So, and it's a gradual process. That's the only way. So we usually distinguish loving kindness, which is wishing happiness and the cause of happiness, compassion, which is an application of loving kindness to suffering. So you wish people who suffer to free from suffering and the cause of suffering. And that's where empathy in the middle comes. So, that person is suffering. And then celebrating the qualities of good people and achievements. And then impartiality, which is not just to, direct that to few people, but to all, like the sun shines on everyone on earth. But they are, because of life circumstances, people who are closer to you, So, of course, they get more warm and more light, but it's not at the cost of discriminating. It just happened that they are close to you, like your children or your spouse or your parent. So, of course, they get more warm, but it's not say, okay, I'm only shining on them. That would be a big mistake because you will shine less well on them as well. You have very narrow sunlight, which is hardly lights anything and hardly warms anything. So if you shine on all, those who come your way get more light and warm, but never at the cost of not shining on all of them.
Hello, Matthieu.
Hello.
Deep gratitude for this. I'm so grateful to be here. I wanted to ask you, how might we as mental health professionals support others who struggle to feel compassion and who perhaps view it as a luxury or unnecessary and unattainable because of the level of their suffering?
Well, I think there's so many things to say about that and many ways to. As an anecdote, once I went to Korea and I met some heads of some monasteries and I talked about compassion. And one of them said, no. People are already so stressed, so tense. And if you're on top of them, you ask them to be compassionate, they'll be even more stressed. But I say, what about if compassion relieves them from their stress? Anyway, I think in some cases, what we call self-compassion that Paul Gilbert have been wonderfully teaching and advocating and writing and using as a therapy is important to be first benevolent toward oneself. Because if we are not benevolent toward oneself, it would be quite difficult to be benevolent with others. So we need to recognize that deep within, even we don't feel we are gifted for happiness. If it was at all possible, we will take it. And so then slowly find a means to achieve that. And then slowly, then you see, okay, same with others. So, and also it could be not because of lack of self-compassion, but maybe be too entirely focused on one thing, and which is quite demanding. So it's sort of, we are a bit there's a tearing that happens. I mean, we get worn out, and our faculty to do so gets worn out, and we push further because we think we are not up to the task, and so that's precisely. We think it's because we are not good enough. So that's precisely one of the causes of burnout. What is the system that has brought up this fact that we either work too much or too many, whatever we have to deal with, and therefore the load, both emotionally and physically, and in terms of workload, is so much that we end up crumbling under that. So that's, of course, more like a societal change, a workplace change, openness to the need of people. But if it's only because of the difficulty of precisely resonating, because one is empathetic and it's a very heavy toll to resonate with others, then clearly to offer training on compassion seems to be the antidote and the balm that remedies to empathic distress. So we have to approach that carefully. It's not like a universal panacea. So, okay, that's it, I'll do it. But there are probably circumstances, outer circumstances, and as well as, the way we look at it. But, sorry, but, even Buddhist practitioner, I met someone who had done 3 years retreat. And she told me at the end that, this distinction between empathic distress and compassion, I never saw that before. And it's really helpful even for a dedicated meditator, because she was feeling time of burnout while trying to generate compassion for all sentient beings. So anyway, I wrote a little bit about it in the Altruism book. I did a few chapters to that, the work with Tanya, and also how the exhaustion of empathy, what it can lead to. So this was some years ago, not so long ago, but I think more research has been done since then, yes.
Thank you very much for your talk. Given the state of the world, the wars, the climate emergency and everything, I guess I'm worried that although what you suggest is obviously right and helpful, but I'm worried the world might end before we manage to have enough influence.
Ending, I don't know, but if I may say, once someone during the second Iraq war, someone told the Dalai Lama, "Why don't you go to Baghdad? Your Nobel Peace Prize, and you could do something." And he said, "Well, if I go there, they'll shoot at me right away." So I think sometimes it's a bit unfair to say, "What about your meditation? Why your altruism? Now look at it. Look at the world." So of course, when the forest is in fire, there's no point telling how you can control the spark. But any war, any conflict, any massacre, any genocide started with a thought of hatred. So that's one thought. And then it's like the spark. If it falls on dry grass, then the whole forest is soon in fire. So that spark goes from one mind to another mind, and and then the whole things get out of control. So right at some circumstances, like many of those which we're living through now, what's the point of advocating for cultivating compassion? Nobody's going to even care a damn for it. So, but this didn't come out of the blue. It came out from education. It came out from societal change. It came out from change of the evolution of culture. This is something like, say, purely Darwinian, but it works faster than genes, fortunately. So all things may take a few years and some time, but that's the way to go. And if we think in terms of pure evolution, evolution select the traits that are more helpful for survival. So certainly selfishness and hatred is not a good trait for survival. We see that. So in a way, evolution might help us to select people who are more cooperative and altruistic. Now, there's a theory of group selection that shows if altruistic people like to cooperate usually. So if they do cooperate, even though one-to-one, an altruist and a selfish guy, the selfish will always win because the altruistic is a nice guy and the other one will take advantage. But if you have a group of altruistic who cooperate against a group of selfish people who kick each other's leg in the meantime, so the group of altruistic has an advantage. So maybe that may work in our favor. Of course, the clock is ticking, especially for the environment, for many conflicts. But, yes, in the past, people used to call me sometime to go in the media. Now I'm old and I don't want to clown around anymore. But also, even they were calling me now, on the French TV news, evening news. I don't know what to say much because the forest is in fire. So at that time, say, good fight, loving kindness. These people won't hear about that. So we need to, it's a societal thing that takes time, but we need to do it regularly. It's more time than ever to promote altruism and compassion. Now, what he says, if it's not the answer, then what? What will be the answer? More hatred? If the Buddha said if hatred replies to hatred, hatred will never cease. And Gandhi said, if it's eye for eye, tooth for tooth, the world will be soon blind and toothless. So someone picked on that and said, oh, you don't know anything about this eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It was at a time where, a tribe, if there was one murder, they would murder everyone else on their side. So it's better to have one for one. But, in our days, if you apply that, and then, of course, sometimes it's actually the case that for one, you kill 10 others. But no matter what, Gandhi is still right. If you apply that, the world will be blind and toothless. So the only way is to break the cycle of hatred. And hatred is a mental phenomena. And that's something you should be able to work on, not to feed hatred, but to somehow let hatred go out of your mind. And it's an immense relief when you break the cycle of hatred. So it's not like forgiving, so, okay, it doesn't matter, never mind, you didn't do so bad. It's just enough of hatred. I remember in the Oklahoma bombing where many people died. And there was a father of a girl who died in the bombing. We said, I don't need another death after my child's death. There's no point. That's not what's going to bring me solace. So that's the thing, Okay.
Thank you so much, Matthieu. I'm sure all
welcome.
Grateful for your breadth and your depth and your lightness and this incredibly important message that you're giving us. Thank you so much.
Okay, take care, everyone, and hope to see some of you at some point.